the question how might come up quite often. How do I do this? How do I do that? And for all practical purposes, we can come up with reasons or explanations for how things happen. But in the ultimate sense, there isn't a how to anything because ultimately there isn't a process to anything. And additionally, there isn't a separate self who needs to know how to make things happen. It's all arising spontaneously without someone doing it. And the ironic headspin is that what's included in that spontaneous arising is this mental story that might appear that says something along the lines of, I'm doing this, or I need to know how to make this happen. That story that follows the experiences is self-originating. It's not being done by anyone. There's no one separate from the experience who's somewhere behind it choosing to make that story happen. It's just a story spontaneously arising, and there is no ultimate how to it. And people have a great deal of anxiety when it comes to the lack of knowledge about how to make something happen. And it's a bit ironic because there isn't anyone who's separate from it that needs to know how. So the anxiety itself is based on a false presupposition that there is a doer behind the experience that is lacking knowledge that they should have or need to have. And that just simply isn't the case. And one could come up with a relative how and say, this can become obvious if you just sit in the silence of what is. If you stop giving so much credence and attention to that story of needing to know how, if you disregard that, you'll notice that what needs to unfold needs for a given circumstance, it just happens automatically. And you might be surprised by this. If you just let go of the need to control it or to make it happen, it just happens by itself, and there is an easefulness to it. It's the notion that there is someone that really needs to make it happen that obfuscates the reality that there isn't. It's already taking care of itself. That's already the case. There isn't a how-to make it all unfold spontaneously. That's already what is. And this can just become obvious when you stop paying attention to this mental narrative that there's someone making things happen. Take these paintings, for example. I don't know how to paint, but if someone likes these paintings, they might disagree and say, oh, certainly you know what you're doing. I don't really, if I'm being honest. Whenever I'm painting, I'm totally silent. I'm not intellectualizing every step along the way. I don't turn it into an analytical process. It just happens. Painting just does itself, but there isn't anyone who's making painting happen. And obviously, there's a particular body that's, holding the brush and making it move and whatnot. But what I mean is there isn't anyone that's controlling that body and its decisions. It's causality and conditioning unfolding. And there isn't anyone that needs to know how to paint. And this seems contradictory. It seems paradoxical because learning how to paint can still seem to happen for people. People can learn painting techniques, and all along the way, there isn't anyone behind that learning that needs to know how it's done. It's almost as if they're being downloaded with information, but there isn't an intermediary that has the responsibility of sorting that information and knowing how it's done. It might seem that way if you pay attention to the story that the mind's telling, but there truly isn't an intermediary there. There might just be the narrative that there is. And the double irony of this is that when you run with this notion that there is a how and there is someone separate that needs to know, that serves as a hindrance to actions because you're pulling your attention away from the actions themselves and focusing more on the analytical process, the story that the mind is telling. So that pulling away of attention from the action to the process of the action is what is serving as a hurdle to the action itself. It's suppressing it. And paradoxically, in this video about the absence of a how, the absence of a need to know, it could all be summed up to be a video about how to get out of your own way. And I suppose that would just be a relative how, because even that in itself isn't based on an absolute. There might be this story that's persisting. Okay, now I know that there isn't a how. So now I know that if I stop attending to that story, then the actions will just flow through much more fluidly. And that's still the mental fabrication arising, which isn't really being originated by anyone who's separate from it. So it seems paradoxical within itself, but in the ultimate sense, there's truly no paradox. It's the non-dual appearing as the dual, only the dual is illusory. It's a mirage of distinctions.